conversation here with Briahna Joy Gray and Robbie. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but Bryan Cranston, in an interview, he made a statement about MAGA, about Make America Great Again. And Bree and Robbie discussed this, and there's some things that I do want to comment on, because Bryan Cranston said that MAGA, the Make America Great Again slogan, is racist. Is that necessarily true? Let's go ahead and get into that. Eric, I'll come back to the chats after this.
Actor Bryan Cranston, famous for his roles as Heisenberg on Breaking Bad, sat down with Chris Wallace on CNN and explained why he thinks the phrase "Make America Great Again" could be construed as a racist remark. Let's take a look.
How did we get to a point where we treated other human beings as slaves, and we're okay with that? When I see the "Make America Great Again," my comment is, do you accept that that could possibly be construed as a racist remark? And most people, a lot of people go, how could that be racist? Make America great again? I said, so just ask yourself from an African-American experience, when was it ever great in America for the African-American? When was it great? So if you're making it great again, it's not including them. So it's to teach us in the woke world to open up and accept the possibilities that our privilege has created blind spots for us.
So Breaking Bad is in the house. I'm sorry. I know he's played other roles, but I still see him as Walter White. Like every time I look at him, I see him as Walter White. But let's talk about this for a second, because what's interesting to me is that I think people give Trump too much credit for this slogan, "Make America Great Again." He wasn't the first to come up with it. Ronald Reagan also had the same slogan. So I did ask around, and I'm asking, like, did people feel that way when Ronald Reagan had that slogan, "Make America Great Again"? Did they feel that it was racist? And most people I've spoken to said no. But some people do feel it is that way under Trump. Now, we're going to get into this discussion here, but I wanted to start off with that. Like, I think people need to stop giving Trump credit for that slogan as if he came up with this. This was already a thing. Just being honest.
What do you think about his breaking down of that slogan?
I don't think it was Breaking Bad. I thought it was Breaking Good. I'm sorry, I had to the second the word breaking came out of my mouth.
Yeah.
No, look, I
invited you to do that.
It's tough. I appreciate that he's clearly been trying to have conversations across the aisle. We talked about his recent interview.
Conversations with Chris Wallace is across the aisle.
Well, I think he's speaking to the way that he's talking about this issue, I think, is looking for an audience that doesn't already agree with him. Mm-hmm. And he similarly had this a similar conversation with Bill Maher recently that we talked about here on this show. And I think he's completely right in identifying why it is that some people hear "Make America Great Again" and see it as completely neutral. Why wouldn't we want America to be great? And other people hear it as an effort to call back to a time that might have been great for some portion of the American public, but was enormously ungreat for another significant section of the public. And part of why I think historically marginalized groups are sensitive about those kinds of statements that glorify yesteryear is because they became very, very popular at a time in American history where there were movements for equality and substantive change. And so if at the same time that you're getting, civil rights under the law and you're getting women finally being able to take credit cards out in their own name, you hear people suddenly start talking about how great the 1950s were, the period just before all of that started happening. Yeah, there's obviously a flag that's going to go off for folks that say, are you really nostalgic for poodle skirts and roast dinners, which are great. Mm-hmm. Love a poodle skirt. Or are you actually nostalgic for a time when women didn't have choices about whether or not they wanted to stay home or get in the workplace? And
So let's talk about that for just a second, because I think that's one of the questions that people often have is like, what are you referring to when you say make America great again? Now, some people have told me, because I know people who voted for Trump, people who voted for, I know people vote for everything, okay? Some people have explained to me that they were referring to the time when the economy was better. Some people have told me they were referring to a time when, you know, America had we still have it, but America actually had more manufacturing, more production, when we still had all of those factories in the United States. I still tie that along with the economy. But I also don't doubt that there are some people who really would like things to be the way that they were years ago socially. There are some people who really do want, and we'll talk about what's happening in Mississippi, if not tomorrow, definitely Sunday. There are some people who really do want to go back to a time when communities were not integrated, when, you know, some groups did not have the rights that they have now. There are still people in this country that prefer to live among people that are just like them, and they do not want to be around people that are not. And that's just a reality. Now, a lot of people aren't going to come out and say that. But what I found from talking to people about that is that make America great again means different things to different people. And then you also have to think about the fact that there are African Americans that also support that slogan and that also supported Donald Trump, and not all of them are Republican. More African American men voted for Donald Trump compared to other Republican presidents. And he had that slogan. So what was it about him that brought some African American men over to his side? And did that statement bother them? I don't think it did. Let's go on.
It's difficult for some people to wrestle with because there's some genuine nostalgia for the non-oppressive aspects of that time period.
I feel that. I feel nostalgia for the 1990s, the period of my own adolescence, in which some things about our society seemed better and healthier. I don't think that's a crazy point to have. Sure. Obviously, some people had, that's before gay marriage was legal, sure, and so on and so forth. But it was also a period before, you know, the global war on terror and, sure, lots of dysfunction in our foreign policy. And
I miss music from the 90s. That's what I miss from the 90s, because I really do feel like it's really hard for me to listen to new music today. And I do try, like when you guys reach out and say, listen to this song, I try. But I felt like in the 90s, there were so many different genres that had their moment to shine. You had the ska movement, you had alternative rock, you had gangster rap, you had the grunge scene, you had the pop scene with the boy bands and the Spice Girls and all that. Like every genre had its moment to shine in the 90s. And don't forget the R&B groups. You had TLC and SWV and all these groups. And it's like everybody had their moment. And I feel like today I just don't see that when it comes to music. Like I listen to if I listen to new rap today, I'm like, what the hell is this? How did you get a record deal? Like, seriously, I'm trying to figure it out. And I can't rap. I admit it. I don't claim to be a rap purist, but something has changed musically. I feel like the songs are shorter. They've gone from being like 3 minutes to 4 minutes. And some of them in the 90s were like 11 minutes long. What is the band? Oasis. Hello, Oasis, Champagne Supernova. 11 minutes long. Now it's like, a lot of the newer songs, you look on Spotify, they're like 2 minutes long. And I'm like, what is this? So it is hard for me. It's difficult for me to like new music because I feel like it seems like not enough artistic integrity goes into the work nowadays. Even the lyrics feel lazy. Like, I'm just being honest. Danielle said talent versus no talent. There you go. There you go.
Probably, at least from the leftist perspective, probably some economic maybe the seeds
right
of it
before the Clinton reformed welfare, cut welfare, and did the crime bill. So there's arguments to be made. for sure.
But I can definitely see why someone would say, "Look, make America great again." It doesn't have. would say you're reading race into it, because we're not saying we want to go back to a time when there was slavery. We want to go back to, before the current government, whoever it is, before Biden or Obama or even Bush, honestly, from the way the Bush family is not popular with Republicans now, came in and wrecked it with, big government spending or a reckless foreign policy or outsourcing jobs or only caring about corporations' bottom lines. We want to go back to before there was so much of that influence, or when you could actually afford a middle class living, when you could afford to go to college, you could pay for it.
Yeah.
You could work part time and pay for it. I think if we're arguing in good faith, and I agree with you. I think Bryan Cranston is being good faith there. He seems affable. I don't think he was making strong claims. I think on the other side, the good faith reading is people, generally referring to that. Now, I'm sure there's some racist people who genuinely, lust for a time when there was more.
I think 99.9% of the people who like the slogan or who are defensive about the slogan, it's not because they're sitting there saying, "Ooh, I want to go do a racism again." Like I'm going to get my grandfather's Klan robe out of the closet and take it to the dry cleaners.
Your grandfather was a federal informant. They're all federal informants always.
That is, by the way, also a plot of a very funny Larry David sketch, the Klan robe at the dry cleaners.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think the majority of people who agree with that slogan want to go back to that per se. And I think that's the point that I was trying to get to, is that I don't think for most people, yes, are there some racists who do feel that way? Oh, absolutely. But I don't think that was the majority of the people that supported Trump and that supported the slogan, to be honest with you. Let's also remember the Bernie Sanders supporters that turned around and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. So would you have said that they were racist also?
Leaders. But I feel like, the reality, none of them, I don't think that they're like thirsting for racism.
Yes.
So the question becomes, if you in good faith embrace the slogan, and then someone explains to you patiently, the way that Bryan Cranston has, why it is that it doesn't resonate the same way with everyone, is there a corresponding openness to understanding, look, I understand why you don't feel included in the mission of where we want America to be headed, and maybe we should do something about that. And I think some of the claims that, I had no idea that the slogan was going to be interpreted this way, are a little bit bad faith, not from the people who are adopting it, but from the people who designed it or decided to use it in the first place. Because it was, in fact, Reagan's 1980 slogan. Yep. We can make America great again. Mm-hmm. And it's more difficult to argue that someone in the 1980s who's literally in 1980, who's coming off of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay rights movement, really right then, literally right up into the end of the 1970s, is hearkening back to some intermediate time that we can point to, like the 90s, where there was substantive equality for most groups, not gay people.
I mean, again, I think with that a good faith reading would be wanted to go back to a time of, they were coming out of their bad economic years, right, during the Carter years, energy issue, going back to a time where the economy was healthier.
But that's.
Yeah, and there's a piece I want to mention in reference to that when we talk about the generations, because that's the thing that I was thinking about as well. It seems like people didn't have that same feeling about the slogan when Ronald Reagan said it. For some reason, people really liked Ronald Reagan. And I'm not kidding, my husband showed me the map. I'll see if I can find it. I may not be able to find it, but my husband showed me the map of how many states Ronald Reagan won in this country. And it was insane. It was absolutely insane. People really believed him about trickle down economics, although we know that shit don't work, but people believed him about that. They believed that this is the way to go and it will help us prosper economically. So a lot of people liked Ronald Reagan. When you look at that map, Eric, let me know if you can find that map. It would be, I forget it's in the 80s. I forget the year, but he did 2 terms back to back. Let me know if you find that map. But the way that he won was absolutely crazy. But something I want to mention when we talk about generations coming from that civil rights movement, and then here is Ronald Reagan saying, make America great again, and we're going to do trickle down economics. So all that kind of stuff is that my best friend, my best friend from high school, we had a revelation like during the George Floyd protest that we were the first people in our family to go to an integrated school. First ones. I'm the oldest sibling. She's the oldest sibling. I'm the oldest grandchild. She's the oldest grandchild. So we were the first ones. We're millennials. What does that tell you guys? That tells you that the civil rights movement, it really was not that long ago as you think it was. Even when you look at the years, and I'm not talking about, just the MLK years. I'm also talking about when the schools were actually lawfully desegregated, when they were lawfully desegregated, because that didn't happen immediately for every school. People need to understand that for some states, like that took years. It took years for some schools to desegregate. It wasn't immediate everywhere. And then you still had segregation that wasn't legally schools that weren't legally segregated, like in places like here in Boston, they weren't legally segregated, but they were segregated until the busing in the 80s. So what I'm trying to get across to people is that we are not far removed from the civil rights movement. And oftentimes when we talk about it, it seems to be discussed in that way, as if this was a long time ago. Wasn't really that long ago. My parents were born before the civil rights, before the MLK years. So what was that? Anna said my school desegregated in the early 70s. See? Different everywhere. Ricky said 1973 for us in Georgia. Now here's that map of Ronald Reagan. I want you guys to see this and I'll go back to the video. When I tell you he killed it, he freaking killed it. I can't make this up. Look, Mondale, you didn't have a chance, bud. You did not have a chance. Because when you see this map, and it's interactive, one state went to Mondale, and that's Minnesota. See it? Minnesota went to the Democrats. Ronald Reagan swept the entire country with the exception of Minnesota. You don't see that today. You don't see that anymore. It wasn't just white people that voted for Ronald Reagan. Black people voted for him too. So when you look at the slogan again, why do people have a problem about it with Trump, but they didn't seem for the most part to have that problem about it with Ronald Reagan? That's something we need to think about. You never see anything like that. All right, let's get back to that clip.
That's exactly the blind spot that Bryan Cranston's talking about, that to look at the 1950s, like, I understand that it is perfecly possible.
I don't have, by the way, I don't have any personal investment in the slogan.
Sure, I know you're not a supporter, but I understand that it's perfectly possible for white people, some white people, to look back at the 1950s and literally not think of anything other than economic prosperity, whatever their family was doing, who was winning the Super Bowl, or what do you call this one?
The Super Bowl's only, I don't think the Super Bowl goes back that far,
I know,
right?
The World Series, the World Series. I'm sorry, the World Series baseball. That year. Baseball that year. And I'm not I understand that. But I just need I need them to understand that it's like next to impossible for a Black person to think of that time period where you literally didn't have rights under the law. I mean, I know that this makes people uncomfortable, and they think that people are being overly sensitive or trying to beat a dead horse. But it's hard for me. My parents were literally born in the United States of America under an apartheid system with unequal rights. Like my parents, this is not like a million years ago. My aunts and uncles went to segregated schools in Virginia, not a million years ago. They're like,
my parents went to segregated schools in Maryland. Like, that's the thing. You didn't even have to be in like the deep South for your parents to experience it. That's the thing. Like, they were in Maryland. They're from Maryland.
living, breathing people. So, it's difficult to say like, well, I just wasn't thinking about that. We have, who was the NFL owner, the team owner, who was just
Jerry.
pictured in one of those crowds of folks that were, I'm not saying what he was doing when he was there, but he was pictured in a crowd of folks that were protesting school integration, and now he owns a football team. So in that
She's talking about Jerry Jones from the Dallas Cowboys.
context, to be able to look back and say, oh, it was a halcyon time, not only does it seem like a blind spot or maybe a privilege, the way that Bryan Cranston put it, but it also seems almost intentionally ignoring, because that guy was there. He knows what was up. And to say, oh, I was thinking about the 1950s, but I wasn't thinking about when I was standing next to a protest of school integration. I was just thinking about how great it was to have a 2-parent household and a chicken in every pot. It seems kind of naive.
Yeah, I get that. I genuinely always had a kind of anti-nostalgia sort of agenda, because I think people over-glamorize or look too fondly at the past and forget about just how much more difficult and less, even, take away the racial context or the accruing more rights, even living without like the greater access to medicines or even to technology.
Yes.
Like, young people were bored. There was less to do. I mean, honestly, we don't appreciate the subtle ways in which our lives have gotten a lot more. They only had 2
channels. Lassie was boring as the Dickens.
They wouldn't be able to watch. They wouldn't be able to watch us having these great conversations on YouTube.
Really interesting. I know some people that really would like to go back to the days where the wives stayed at home and cooked all the meals and the dad went to work. My friend tried that experiment for like a year. It didn't last long. It did not work out too well. She went back to work. But some people would like to go back to that time when families were, I guess, as some are putting it, more wholesome, so to speak, or people actually spent more time with their families and not on their phones. I'm talking to you. Or not in front of the TV all the time. Some people I know do want to go back to that kind of time, but I think in order to have that type of return to simplicity, I think that people would need to detach themselves from social media. I really do. And maybe even Netflix every now and then. Pull out a board game in front of your peeps.